They thought it was the ultimate punchline, setting up the exhausted single dad with a deaf woman just to watch him squirm. But when the cruel prank unfolded in a crowded upscale restaurant, the joke was entirely on them, because they had no idea who she really was or what he was about to do. Thomas Gallagher was the kind of man who carried the weight of the world in his posture, yet always made sure to hold the door open for the person behind him. At 34, he was a single father to a spirited 6-year-old named Madison. Since his wife passed away 3 years ago from a sudden illness, Tommy's life had been reduced to a relentless cycle. Wake up at 5:30 a.m., pack lunches, drop Madison at elementary school, endure a grueling 9-hour shift at the corporate offices of Meridian Logistics, pick Madison up, make dinner, read a bedtime story, and collapse. He was a good man, but in the cutthroat, superficial environment of Meridian Logistics, being good made you a target. The sales department was dominated by Greg Hastings and Chelsea Montgomery, a duo whose combined arrogance was only matched by their designer wardrobes. They thrived on office gossip and belittling anyone who didn't spend their weekends at country clubs. To them, Tommy, with his scuffed loafers, off-the-rack suits, and tired eyes, was the resident punchline. They mocked his packed lunches. They rolled their eyes when he had to leave promptly at 5 p.m. for childcare. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Chelsea, scrolling through a dating app on her phone during a brainstorming session, hatched a plan that she deemed a masterclass in comedy. "Look at this," Chelsea whispered, leaning over her mahogany desk to show Greg. On the screen was a profile for a woman named Zoe. Her pictures were simple, mostly selfies in parks or reading at coffee shops, but it was her bio that caught Chelsea's malicious eye. At the very bottom, it read, "I am profoundly deaf. I rely on lip reading and ASL, looking for someone patient who wants a genuine connection." Greg smirked, swirling his iced coffee. "Oh, that's rich. A mute?" "Deaf, Greg. But still," Chelsea giggled, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the screen. "Imagine setting Gallagher up with her. The guy barely has the energy to string 2 sentences together as it is. Imagine him trying to navigate a date with someone he can't even talk to. It would be an absolute train wreck. The awkward silence alone would be Oscar-worthy." "Do it," Greg urged, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Tell him we found a quiet, low-maintenance girl who's perfect for him. We'll book them a table at the Obsidian Room. We can sit at the bar and watch the whole thing go down." The setup was executed with chilling ease. Chelsea approached Tommy in the break room later that week, wearing a mask of faux sympathy. She told him that she and Greg felt bad about how hard he worked and wanted to do something nice. They had a friend, she lied, a wonderful, sweet woman who was tired of the modern dating scene and just wanted a good, honest guy. Tommy hesitated. He hadn't been on a date since his wife died. The thought of sitting across from a stranger terrified him. But the loneliness had been creeping in lately, a cold draft in his quiet apartment after Madison went to sleep. "She's really special, Tommy," Chelsea had said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Just give it a shot. Friday night, drinks and dinner, my treat for setting it up." Desperate to believe that his co-workers were finally showing him an ounce of humanity, Tommy agreed. For the next 3 days, Tommy felt a flicker of nervous excitement he hadn't experienced in years. He bought a new button-down shirt, navy blue, which Madison told him made his eyes look bright. He arranged for his neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, to watch Madison for the evening. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror on Friday night, splashing cold water on his face, giving himself a pep talk. Just be yourself, he thought. Maybe this is the turning point. What Tommy didn't know was that Zoe Sinclair was not just a sweet, quiet girl from a dating app. She was the heiress to the Sinclair family fortune and the brilliant, cutthroat CEO of Echo Technologies, a multi-billion-dollar accessibility software firm. Exhausted by men who only saw her bank account or treated her deafness as a pitiful defect, Zoe had created a burner profile. No mention of her wealth, no designer clothes in the photos. Just Zoe. She had been conversing with Tommy all week, though it was actually Chelsea messaging her, setting the trap, conveniently leaving out any mention of Zoe's deafness to Tommy, and feeding Zoe lies about Tommy being an eccentric chatterbox who loved a challenge. The stage was set for a disaster. The obsidian room was intimidatingly dark, smelling of expensive leather, truffle oil, and wealth. Tommy arrived 15 minutes early, pulling nervously at the collar of his new shirt. The maître d' led him to a secluded booth near the center of the dining room. Unbeknownst to him, just 30 feet away, tucked into a shadowy corner of the lavish marble bar, sat Greg and Chelsea. They were sipping $80 martinis, their phones resting on the counter, ready to record the moment Tommy's spirit broke. $10 as he walks out within 5 minutes, Greg chuckled, adjusting his Rolex. No way, he's too polite, Chelsea countered, her eyes glued to Tommy's booth. He'll sit there sweating bullets, trying to yell at her. It's going to be glorious. At precisely 7 p.m., Zoe walked in. Even in her attempt to dress down, wearing a simple, elegant emerald green slip dress and minimal makeup, she commanded the room. There was a quiet power in her stride. She approached the hostess, showed her a text on her phone, and was guided toward Tommy's table. Tommy stood up immediately, offering a warm, albeit nervous, smile. Zoe? I'm Tommy. Zoe smiled back, a genuine, radiant expression. She reached into a clutch, pulled out a small, sleek notepad and a pen, and quickly jotted something down. She slid it across the table to him. Tommy looked down at the paper. In elegant cursive, it read, "Hi, Tommy. It is so wonderful to finally meet you. I apologize, but Chelsea didn't mention if she told you. I am completely deaf. I can read lips quite well if you speak slowly and face me. I hope this isn't a shock." Tommy froze. He stared at the notepad, the words sinking in. The gears in his head turned rapidly. Chelsea hadn't mentioned this. In fact, Chelsea had explicitly said her friend was a great listener who loved talking over a bottle of wine. Suddenly, the hair on the back of Tommy's neck stood up. The faux sympathy, the expensive restaurant, the insistence that he go. It wasn't a favor. It was a setup. He slowly lifted his eyes, scanning the perimeter of the restaurant. It only took him 4 seconds to spot them. Over by the bar, Chelsea was hastily holding her phone up, clearly trying to angle the camera toward their booth while Greg was hiding a laugh behind his cocktail glass. A wave of profound, suffocating humiliation washed over Tommy. His face flushed a deep crimson. They had weaponized his loneliness. Worse, they had weaponized a complete stranger's disability just for a cheap laugh. He looked back at Zoe. She was watching him, her smile faltering slightly, a look of apprehension creeping into her beautiful eyes. She was used to this reaction, the panic, the pity, the sudden urge for the man to flee. She began reaching for her notepad, likely to write an apology and excuse herself. But Tommy didn't run. Instead, a quiet, fierce resolve settled over him. He wasn't going to let these bullies win, and he absolutely was not going to let this innocent woman feel like she was part of a cruel joke. Tommy gently placed his hand over Zoe's, stopping her from pulling the notepad away. He looked directly into her eyes, ensuring his face was perfectly illuminated by the candle on the table. Then he lifted his hands. His fingers moved with fluid. practiced grace. "They didn't tell me," Tommy signed, his facial expressions matching the sincerity of his words. "But I'm incredibly lucky they didn't, because I am so honored to meet you." Zoe gasped. Her eyes widened in absolute shock, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked at him, searching his face for any hint of mockery, but found only deep, genuine warmth. "You know ASL," she signed back, her hands trembling slightly. "My daughter, Madison, lost her hearing in one ear due to an infection when she was a baby," Tommy signed, smiling as he spoke the words aloud for his own rhythm, making sure to enunciate clearly for her to read his lips as well. "We've been learning together for 3 years. I'm a bit rusty, but I promise to try my best." Over at the bar, the smug anticipation on Greg and Chelsea's faces began to curdle into intense confusion. "Wait, what is he doing?" Greg squinted, leaning forward. "Is he doing gang signs?" "No, you idiot," Chelsea hissed, her jaw dropping. He's doing sign language. How the hell does he know sign language?" Instead of the agonizing, awkward silence they had banked on, the booth was suddenly alive with an intimate, beautiful energy. Tommy and Zoe were entirely focused on each other. Zoe's initial defensive posture melted away. She laughed, a bright, beautiful sound, at something Tommy signed, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of relief and intense curiosity. Tommy told her about Madison, about his long days, about the clumsy attempts he made at baking cupcakes for school bake sales. Zoe, in turn, opened up in a way she hadn't in years. She didn't reveal her CEO status yet. She was too intoxicated by the rare experience of being treated like a normal, valued human being. She told him about her love for classic literature, the frustration of navigating a noisy world, and her passion for technology. An hour passed, then 2. The waiter brought out their entrees, and they barely noticed, so engrossed were they in their silent, expressive dialogue. Chelsea's phone had long since been put away. She and Greg were practically vibrating with frustration. The prank hadn't just failed, it had spectacularly backfired, giving Tommy the best night of his life. "This is ridiculous," Greg muttered, throwing a $50 bill on the bar. "Let's go over there. I'm not letting him walk away thinking he won this." Chelsea nodded, her pride bruised. "Yeah, let's go say hello to the happy couple." They slid off their bar stools, plastering on fake smiles, and began marching toward the booth, completely unaware that they were about to step into a trap infinitely more devastating than the one they had set. Greg and Chelsea practically glided across the dimly lit expanse of the obsidian room, their expressions a masterclass in feigned innocence. To anyone else, they were just 2 colleagues dropping by to say hello. But Tommy knew the micro-expressions of his tormentors all too well. The slight twitch of Greg's jaw, the predatory gleam in Chelsea's eyes. They were hyenas circling what they believed to be a wounded animal. Tommy's peripheral vision caught their approach. His hands stopped mid-sign, resting gently on the white linen tablecloth. He took a slow, deep breath, bracing himself. Zoe noticed the sudden shift in his demeanor. The relaxed, joyful set of his shoulders had instantly morphed into a defensive posture. She followed his line of sight and saw the striking, impeccably dressed couple stopping at the edge of their booth. "Tommy!" Chelsea sang out, her voice entirely too loud for the intimate setting. Heads turned at a few adjacent tables. "We couldn't believe it when we saw you from the bar. What are the odds? And this must be your date." Chelsea dragged out the final word, letting it drip with condescension as she turned her gaze to Zoe. Tommy stood up, positioning his body slightly between his co-workers and Zoe. "Greg, Chelsea. What a surprise. Yes, this is Zoe. We were just having dinner." Greg leaned over, bracing his hands on the table, invading their personal space. "So we see, Gallagher." So we see. Chelsea was just saying how quiet it looked over here. Figured we'd come liven things up. We were worried you two ran out of things to talk about. Zoe watched the exchange intently. Though she couldn't hear the mocking tone of Greg's voice, her lip-reading skills were unparalleled. She caught every word, every patronizing syllable. She also caught the way Tommy's fists clenched at his sides. Chelsea leaned down, putting her face uncomfortably close to Zoe's, and began over-enunciating her words as if speaking to a toddler. Hi, Zoe, I am Chelsea. I set you two up. Is he treating you well? Tommy's face flushed red with a sudden, surging anger. The humiliation he felt for himself earlier was nothing compared to the fierce protectiveness that now ignited within him. Chelsea, stop it, Tommy snapped, his voice sharp and authoritative, a tone neither of them had ever heard him use at the office. She's deaf, she's not stupid, and she doesn't need you shouting in her face. Greg scoffed, crossing his arms. Whoa, down, boy. She was just being friendly. No need to get aggressive just because your little blind date turned out to be a dud. Before Tommy could verbally tear Greg apart, Zoe reached out and placed a gentle hand on Tommy's forearm. The coolness of her touch grounded him instantly. She offered him a reassuring, serene smile, then gracefully stood up from the booth. Despite being dressed in a simple slip dress, Zoe radiated an undeniable, intimidating aura of authority. She looked Chelsea up and down, a gesture so dismissive and clinical that Chelsea instinctively took a step back. Zoe picked up her phone from the table, typed rapidly for a few seconds, and pressed a button. The phone's text-to-speech app broke the tense silence in a clear, robotic voice that carried perfectly over the ambient noise of the restaurant. Chelsea, is it? I can read lips perfectly fine without you distorting your face. And Greg, you should know that silence isn't an indicator of an empty mind. It is often a sign of one observing the fools around them. Greg's smirk vanished. Chelsea looked utterly bewildered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Excuse me? Chelsea sputtered. You have a lot of nerve for someone who— Is there a problem here, Ms. Sinclair? The stern, heavily accented voice came from behind Greg. It belonged to Arthur Pendleton, the notoriously strict general manager of the Obsidian Room, known for catering exclusively to the city's elite. Arthur was flanked by two burly men in dark suits who looked distinctly like private security. Arthur completely ignored Greg and Chelsea, his eyes fixed respectfully on Zoe. I was informed by your detail outside that you had arrived, Ms. Sinclair. I apologize for not greeting you sooner. I wanted to personally ensure your evening is flawless. Shall I have these two escorted away, so you and your guest can dine in peace? Greg let out a harsh, nervous laugh. Escorted away? Buddy, I think you have the wrong person. We work with Gallagher here. He's a mid-level data entry guy at Meridian Logistics, and she's just a girl from a dating app. Arthur shot Greg a look of sheer, unadulterated pity. Sir, Arthur said coldly, this is Zoe Sinclair, founder and chief executive officer of Echo Technologies. She is one of our most esteemed investors. I strongly suggest you lower your voice and step away from her table immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that sucked the oxygen right out of the room. Greg's face lost all color, turning an ashen, sickly grey. Chelsea's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror that was entirely authentic. Echo Technologies. The name hit Greg and Chelsea like a physical blow. Just 3 days prior, the CEO of Meridian Logistics, Rick Hayes, had held a mandatory all-hands meeting. Echo Technologies, recently valued by Sequoia Capital at over $4 billion, was expanding its global hardware distribution. They were looking for a new logistics partner, Securing the Echo contract was Meridian's sole, desperate focus for the entire quarter. The commission alone for the sales team would be life-changing, and Greg and Chelsea had just spent the last 10 minutes mocking the woman who held the pen. Zoe typed on her phone again. The synthetic voice rang out, a harbinger of corporate doom. Greg Hastings and Chelsea Montgomery. I thought I recognized you. I reviewed Meridian Logistics' preliminary pitch deck yesterday morning. Your headshots were on the second page under Lead Account Executives. Mr. Hayes spoke very highly of your professionalism. Zoe paused, looking at them with a gaze so piercing it felt like frostbite. She lifted her hands, looking directly at Tommy, signing in sharp, emphatic motions. Tommy swallowed hard, translating her signs into spoken words, his voice trembling slightly with the sheer magnitude of what was happening. She says, Tommy translated, never breaking eye contact with his tormentors. She says she has spent her entire life dealing with people who view her deafness as a weakness to be exploited. She built her company to give a voice to the voiceless and to tear down barriers built by ignorant people. Zoe signed another furious sentence. She says, Tommy continued, a slow, vindicated smile finally touching the corners of his mouth, that Meridian Logistics will be receiving a formal email tomorrow morning. Echo Technologies will not be doing business with a company that employs individuals who treat people with such profound cruelty. Your pitch is dead. Ms. Sinclair, wait, please, Greg stammered, his arrogance completely shattered. He held his hands up in a placating gesture. This was just a misunderstanding, a joke. We didn't know who you were. Zoe didn't bother typing on this time. She looked at Greg, her eyes burning with contempt, and used her own voice. It was soft, carrying the slight inflection characteristic of the profoundly deaf, but it possessed a terrifying gravity. That, Zoe spoke, carefully forming the words, is the entire point. You thought I was nobody, so you showed me exactly who you are. She turned to Arthur. Arthur, please remove them. With pleasure, Ms. Sinclair, Arthur said. The two security guards immediately stepped forward, placing firm hands on Greg and Chelsea's shoulders. Tommy, man, come on, Greg pleaded, panic elevating his voice to a whine as he was physically turned around. Tell her we're good people. Tell her it was a joke. Tommy looked at the man who had mocked his packed lunches, his cheap suits, and his dedication to his daughter. He looked at the woman who had thought it was hilarious to use a disability as a punchline. Have a good night, Greg, Tommy said quietly. Greg and Chelsea were marched out of the restaurant, their protests fading into the luxurious ambience of the dining room. The patrons who had been watching quickly averted their eyes, pretending to be deeply fascinated by their truffles and wine. Once they were gone, the adrenaline slowly began to drain from Tommy's body. He sank back into the plush leather of the booth, his mind spinning like a compass in a magnetic storm. Zoe sat back down across from him. The formidable CEO mask melted away, replaced once again by the vulnerable, radiant woman he had been talking to for the past 2 hours. She reached into her clutch, pulled out her notepad, and wrote frantically. She slid it toward him. I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I promise I wasn't trying to deceive you. I just wanted one night where I wasn't a bank account or a PR opportunity. I just wanted to be Zoe. Tommy looked at the note, then looked up at her. He didn't see a billionaire. He didn't see an imposing tech titan. He saw a woman who, much like himself, was just desperately searching for a genuine connection in a world that so often felt incredibly isolating. He reached across the table, took her pen, and wrote beneath her apology. You have nothing to apologize for. Though I have to admit, you just gave me the best Friday night of my entire life. Zoe read it and let out a breathless laugh, her hand covering her heart. "Does this mean you don't mind that I blew up your co-workers' careers?" She signed, a mischievous glint returning to her eyes. Tommy chuckled, signing back. "Honestly, I think my daughter Madison is going to love that story. She hates bullies." The rest of the evening blurred into a beautiful cascade of shared stories, laughter, and an unspoken understanding that they had both stumbled into something remarkably rare. When the night finally ended, Tommy walked Zoe to the curb where her private black car was waiting. Under the soft glow of the street lamps, she reached up, gently resting her hands on his chest, and kissed his cheek. "Call me," she signed, before slipping into the car. Monday morning at Meridian Logistics was nothing short of a corporate apocalypse. By 9 a.m., the news had ripped through the office like a shockwave. Rick Hayes, the CEO, had received an email directly from the executive board of Echo Technologies. The contents of that email were not made public to the floor, but the results were instantaneous. At 9:15 a.m., Greg and Chelsea were summoned to the top floor. At 9:45 a.m., they were escorted out of the building by building security, carrying small cardboard boxes containing their desk plants and framed photos of their country club weekends. They didn't look up. They didn't speak. They looked entirely broken. The irony was poetic. The two loudest, most arrogant voices in the office had been forced into absolute, humiliated silence. Tommy sat at his desk, quietly sipping his coffee, watching them leave. He felt no guilt. He only felt a profound sense of peace. Around 11 a.m., Tommy's desk phone rang. It was the CEO's assistant, asking him to come up to Rick Hayes' office immediately. When Tommy walked in, Rick looked like he had aged 5 years over the weekend. He motioned for Tommy to sit. "Tommy," Rick began, rubbing his temples, "I had an interesting conversation with the team at Echo Technologies this morning. Apparently, you made quite an impression on their CEO, Ms. Sinclair, on Friday night." "We had a nice dinner, sir," Tommy said neutrally. Rick sighed. "I fired Greg and Chelsea. Their behavior was egregious, unforgivable. It cost us the biggest contract of the decade." He leaned forward, looking at Tommy with a mixture of desperation and newfound respect. However, Ms. Sinclair's office sent a secondary communication. They stated that while they will not use Meridian for their global shipping, they are willing to open a dialogue about a smaller regional contract, but under one non-negotiable condition. Tommy raised an eyebrow. "What condition?" "They will only deal with you," Rick said, sliding a thick file across the desk. "You are to be the sole account director for the Echo portfolio. It comes with a corner office, a promotion to vice president of regional sales, and a salary that I imagine will make your life a lot easier. Are you up for it, Gallagher?" Tommy thought of the endless 5:30 a.m. wake-ups. He thought of the budget spreadsheets he agonizingly pored over every month to ensure Madison had enough for her hearing specialist appointments. He thought of the incredible, brilliant woman who had seen his worth when everyone else had treated him like a joke. "I am," Tommy said firmly. 6 months later, the corporate offices of Meridian Logistics were a distant memory. Tommy had accepted the promotion, stabilized his finances, and eventually left the toxic culture of Meridian entirely. He was now running the newly established philanthropic wing of Echo Technologies, leading initiatives to provide free ASL resources and accessibility technology to public elementary schools across the country. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon in the park. The autumn leaves were painted in brilliant shades of amber and gold. Tommy sat on a picnic blanket, watching as a 9-year-old Madison chased a golden retriever puppy across the grass. Sitting next to him, wrapped in a thick wool sweater, was Zoe. She was leaning against his shoulder, a warm cup of cider resting in her hands. Madison ran back over, collapsing onto the blanket, breathless and laughing. She looked at Zoe, her hands moving rapidly. "The dog is so fast." Madison signed, her face glowing with pure joy. Zoe smiled warmly, putting her cider down to free her hands. "You are faster. You just need to trick him with a treat." Tommy wrapped his arm around Zoe's waist, pulling her close, as he watched the two most important women in his life converse in a language of beautiful, silent grace. He couldn't help but marvel at the twisted road that had led him here. A cruel prank, born of malice and arrogance, had shattered the lonely walls of his life, letting in a light he never could have imagined. They had tried to make him the punchline of a joke. Instead, they gave him the greatest gift he could have ever asked for. And as Zoe rested her head on his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat, they both knew that some silences weren't empty at all. They were just waiting for the right person to listen. If this story made you believe in karma and the power of standing up for what's right, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that good guys do win. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible, true-to-life dramas with twists you won't see coming. Have you ever turned a bad situation into a total victory? Tell us in the comments below.